We're following the breaking news, sad news out of Syria this hour, a deadly suicide attack on a U.S. patrolled area of Manbij, and we can now report that U.S. service members were killed in this attack. The U.S.-led coalition against ISIS tweeting moments ago, quote, U.S. service members, plural, were killed during an explosion while conducting a routine patrol in Syria today. We are still gathering information and will share additional details at a later time.
We also have video coming in of the moment that this blast occurred. Before we play it for you, a warning: the images are extremely graphic and disturbing, but watch this take place.
10 seconds.
There you go.
Yeah.
You see pedestrians just walking down the street again in this U.S. patrolled city of Manbij. Here's what we know right now. Several casualties reported, again, an area where several U.S. soldiers deployed. Waiting more details. ISIS has claimed responsibility this morning. We are also being told the president has been fully briefed on this. And the timing here, this attack comes less than a month after the president announced his plan to withdraw U.S. troops. We've got 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria, to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria, and then declared that ISIS was defeated in Syria. Barbara Starr is at the Pentagon this morning. And Barbara, look, we have not confirmed it, but ISIS is claiming responsibility.
ISIS is claiming responsibility. It is not confirmed. There are many cases where they do claim responsibility for attacks, and it turns out to be another perpetrator. Nonetheless, we know that President Trump, on his holiday trip to Iraq, had been told by top commanders ISIS was not fully defeated in the area and that ISIS was still very much present in certain areas of Syria. This area of Manbij in northern Syria, up against the Turkish border, is unsettled for any number of reasons. There's a lot of players in the area. The Turks to the north are trying to push back the U.S.-backed fighters in the area. They would like to see a zone across that border where there are no Kurds. Some of those are units that the U.S. has been backing. The Russians want Assad to take control of the area. So there's a lot of reasons there may be violence in this particular region. The U.S. has conducted about a dozen joint patrols with the Turks in recent months to try and bring some stability to Manbij. But this is the big uncertainty. The president now calling for a withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria, not immediately anymore as he did initially. They are working on a withdrawal plan. This area of northern Syria could well be one of the first areas they come out of. So the question now, is there new vulnerability in this area for the U.S. troops that are there? Do some of the bad actors perceive that this is their time to make a move because the U.S. is leaving? There is no answer to that question, of course, but it's one of the questions being asked today as we find out, tragically, multiple U.S. military members have been killed in this suicide blast. Bobby, Jim?
And if it is ISIS, it outright belies the claim that ISIS has been defeated
there
in the area if you're able to carry out a complex attack like this. Barbara Starr, thanks very much.
So the White House has been briefed on this ongoing situation. Let's go to our senior Washington correspondent, Joe Johns, who joins us outside the White House. Outside of that official statement that the president has been fully briefed, are you getting any reaction from your sources in the White House, given that this is less than a month, Joe, after the president said, look, we're going to pull our troops out of Syria, and the claim that ISIS had been completely defeated there?
So far, no information from aides here at the White House. As you say, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders has put out a statement saying the president's been briefed. This is sort of the typical statement you see in a situation like this from the White House. The president's been briefed. She says he's going to continue to monitor the situation and has now referred questions on the situation to the Pentagon, where Barbara Starr is, of course. But it's also important to just look at a little bit of the history of all this. Barbara referred to some of it, the idea that the president would make this precipitous decision and an announcement to remove troops from Syria, creating a great deal of confusion, quite frankly, particularly for United States allies, including the Kurds, of course, who are concerned about their safety in a situation where Turkey might turn on them, because Turkey sees the Kurds essentially as a terrorist organization in Syria. So all of this with the background of the President of the United States putting out a number of tweets, a number of announcements suggesting that, in fact, this was a good reason to leave simply because Syria no longer had a problem, and the United States no longer had a problem, if you will, with ISIS. Let's just look at one of the tweets. We've won against ISIS, we've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly. We've taken back the land, and now it's time for our troops to come home. But it's also interesting that on December 30th, the president wrote on Twitter, "If ISIS hits us, they are doomed." So that raises the question of how the president of the United States might respond now that we have this news out of Syria. Back to you.
Joe Johns, thank you for that reporting at the White House.
Joining us now is CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's former Army commanding officer in Europe. He also commanded U.S. forces in Iraq. General Hertling, I don't have to tell you about attacks like this. I know, forces serving under your command suffered attacks just like this on the ground in Iraq. First, I would just ask you this. What does it take for a group such as ISIS to carry out an attack like this? And does it show that they still have a capability, a presence in northern Syria to be able to target U.S. forces in this way?
Well, it certainly does, Jim. I'm going to counter what you said a minute ago in terms of it being a complex attack. There's nothing simpler than someone going with a suicide vest and torching it off. It's easy to do. But having said that, you are right in the complexity of getting it approved. Usually it takes a great deal of work to put a suicide bomber together. And what I mean by that is you not only need the willingness of an individual to wear the vest, you need someone to make it, which is sometimes challenging. But usually in these kind of terrorist cells, you also need someone to bless him to go into these attacks, which is usually some type of ISIS or terrorist imam, a guy who says, yes, you're allowed to do this according to the Quran. So all of these things come together to make it a little bit more difficult. As devastating and as gruesome as that blast appears on the tape that you just showed, there's even more to it than that, because each one of these vests more than likely has projectiles within it. So you not only have injuries and maiming and destruction based on the blast alone, but it is shooting probably nails, screws, shotgun pellets, great distances. So even though it hits that small place where you saw the blast take place, it was probably affecting quite a few people in a much larger radius than just the front of that group of stores.
General Hertling, Russia has a great interest in the future of Syria and a particularly keen interest on this area. And I'm wondering sort of how you think that could possibly be affected here. Obviously, if the U.S. does go through with the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Syria, that is something that... Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a report from a Kurdish commander yesterday. I certainly can't confirm this, but I saw this from one of my colleagues, that a Kurdish commander did in fact travel to Moscow saying that should the United States withdraw, will you help us? And the report back to the Kurds were that Moscow was very willing to help the Kurds. So anytime the United States leaves a vacuum someplace, other people will go in and fill it. Now, Barbara also used the term safe zone. Having heard that term multiple times throughout my career, what I will tell you on that is zones that are attempted to be established like that are never bounded. There's never really a zone, and they're almost never safe. Because there's a lot of players in these areas trying to get the upper hand and work their own particular agenda. And certainly in northern Syria, especially in this area of Manbij, there's a lot of people trying to play. It's very complex there.
General, Poppy mentions Russia, of course, Iran also interested in this area greatly. It's early, but you've dealt with attacks as a commander on the ground before. Yeah. Would you be concerned that a country such as Russia or Iran would help pave the way for an attack like this on U.S. forces to help pressure them out? Do you have any experience where outside players...
That's hard to say, Jim, but what I will say is usually there are support for these kinds of actors. Don't know who it was in this case, but what I'd go back to is the fact that anytime any military commander or government says that they have defeated a terrorist organization like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, name that tune, they are never defeated. They always go underground until you can actually squash the ideology. They are not defeated in northern Syria and even in Iraq, as the Iraqi government has said. They will continue to conduct these kind of attacks and they will attempt to get support from larger governments wherever they can find it.
Yep. 4 weeks ago today, the president tweeted, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria." General Mark Hertling, Lieutenant General, thanks very much as always.